Scholz has signed an EU cooperation agreement with the government of Serbia on lithium excavation, the minerals used to make batteries for electric cars. The agreement has run into resistance in Serbia as a lithium mine would destroy agriculture in the west of the country. The EU is keen to shift its reliance on China for natural resources towards Europe. DW has been...
Now, Zimbabwe is taking steps to try and create more local cash and benefit from its own national resources. It said that it will ban exports of lithium concentrates from 2027. Now, the hope is that will force mining companies to start processing and refining the mineral in the country, with the knock-on effect of creating more jobs and infrastructure for Zimbabweans. Now, the country has the continent's largest lithium reserves and already banned the export of lithium ore 3 years ago, or is the raw form.
If you don't get away from this green scam, your country is going to fail. And I'm really good at predicting things, you know. They actually said during the campaign they had a hat, the best-selling hat. Trump was right about everything. And I don't say that in a braggadocious way, but it's true. I've been right about everything. And I'm telling you that if you don't get away from the green energy scam, your country is going to fail. And if you don't stop people that you've never seen before, that you have nothing in common with, your country is going to fail. I'm the President of the United States, but I worry about Europe. I love Europe. I love the people of Europe. And I hate to see it being devastated by energy and immigration. This double-tailed monster destroys everything in its wake, and they cannot let that happen any longer. You're doing it because you want to be nice, you want to be politically correct, and you're destroying your heritage.
The world just witnessed a thunderclap in history. A decision so powerful, so shocking, that its echo has already rattled the walls of Washington and Paris. The United States and France came to Africa with a deal $1 billion offer they thought was irresistible. They came dressed in their usual arrogance, carrying pens instead of guns this time, but the intention was the same as always: to strip Africa of its treasure. They thought we would kneel. They thought we would sign. They thought the chains of dependency would force us to surrender. But what happened instead shook the very foundations of global power. Africa stood tall and said no. And make no mistake, this no was not just about money. It was not just about lithium. It was a rebellion against centuries of exploitation. It was the shattering of an illusion, the illusion that Africa can be bought cheaply, that Africa must remain silent, that Africa has no choice. For the first time in modern history, Africa refused the carrot dangled by the West, and in doing so, it pulled the mask off the empire itself. Let us pause and understand the weight of this. Lithium is not just another mineral, it is the bloodline of the 21st century. It powers electric cars, smartphones, satellites, renewable energy grids, the very engines of the so-called green future the West preaches about. Whoever controls lithium controls the future. America and France came believing Africa would hand over this treasure for scraps, as we once did with gold, cocoa, uranium, and oil. But Africa looked them in the eye and declared, "The era of exploitation is over." Imagine the panic in Paris, the fury in Washington. Their analysts had assured them Africa was desperate. Their think tanks had written endless papers about African dependency. Their corporations had already drafted blueprints for the mines, the shipping, routes, the profits. They believed it was already theirs. And in one stroke, Africa or the script to pieces. This rejection is not just an economic act, it is a psychological earthquake. For centuries, the West told Africa, "You need us. You cannot survive without us. You are too poor, too weak, too divided." But with this one refusal, Africa told the West, "It is you who cannot survive without us. You need our minerals, our markets, our land, our youth, our power. We are the backbone of your empire, and the backbone is rising." Do you see why they are terrified? This is not just about lithium. This is about power shifting from the old order to the new. If Africa can reject this deal, it can reject all others. If Africa can demand fair trade, then Latin America can demand it too. If Africa can rise, then the global South can rise as well. And if that happens, the West loses its greatest weapon, control. And here is the deeper truth. Africa is no longer negotiating from weakness. Our lands hold the cobalt for their batteries, the uranium for their reactors, the gold for their banks, the oil for their engines, and the lithium for their future. The West has built its empire on our resources, and now the empire trembles at the thought of being cut off. That is why this story is not about a single deal, it is about the rebirth of a continent. It is about Africa realizing its power. It is about Africa declaring to the world, we are not your mine, we are not your warehouse, we are not your charity case. We are the future, and you will respect us or you will be left behind. So tonight, as we begin this journey, let us be clear. What happened was not just business, it was war. Not with guns, but with contracts. Not with bombs, but with words. And in this war, Africa just fired its first shot and the world is shaking. This is the story of how a billion-dollar bribe became the spark of a revolution. The story of how brothers and sisters, sons and daughters of Africa, and those listening from every corner of the globe, today we gather not just to witness history, but to declare it, to own it, to write it with our own hands and voices. What has unfolded in the heart of Africa over the past weeks is nothing short of revolutionary. Africa, the continent long exploited, lectured, and looted, has just stood up, raised its voice, and told two of the most powerful empires in the world. No, yes, Africa has rejected the billion-dollar lithium deal from the United States and France. They came with their contracts, their smiles, their promises dressed in gold but hiding chains. They came believing we would bow, that we would trade away the very lifeblood of our future for crumbs from their table. But for the first time in modern history, Africa did not bend. Africa said no, and in that no, the world shook. Lithium white gold, the heart of modern technology, the mineral without which electric cars cannot run, smartphones cannot function, and clean energy cannot advance. Lithium is the key to the future, the crown jewel of the global energy transition, and Africa, rich in this treasure, holds the master key. Yet for decades, we were told we were too weak to manage it, too divided to control it, too dependent to use it for ourselves. The United States and France came with their billion-dollar offers, calling it investment, calling it partnership. But we know the truth. We have seen this movie before. They said the same about our cocoa, and we were left with poverty while they made billions. They said the same about our oil, and we were left with debts while their corporations flourished. They said the same about our gold, our uranium, our diamonds, and in every case, Africa was robbed while they grew rich. But today, Africa has broken that cycle. Leaders from across the continent looked at those contracts, looked at the hidden clause of exploitation buried in the fine print, and they tore them apart. They said, our lithium will no longer be shipped to Europe and America. Our lithium will no longer feed foreign industries while our children remain in darkness. Our lithium will no longer be a chain around our necks. Our lithium will build Africa. And in that moment, Africa rose. Imagine the panic in Washington. Imagine the fury in Paris. They never expected this. They believed Africa was still asleep, still divided, still chained to their loans and aid, but they miscalculated. This is not the Africa of yesterday. This is not the Africa they could bully with IMF threats, or seduce with World Bank loans, or control with military bases. This is a new Africa, confident, sovereign, and determined to chart its own destiny. And let us be clear, this rejection was not just about money. It was about dignity. It was about sovereignty. It was about the principle that Africa's resources will no longer leave this continent without Africa deciding how, when, and why. It was about declaring to the world that we are no longer beggars at the gate of Western corporations. We are owners. We are producers. We are builders. Lithium is the future. And for the first time, Africa has chosen to own its future. No longer will raw lithium be shipped at low prices, only for us to buy back the batteries at 10 times the cost. No longer will we play the role of suppliers while others play the role of rulers. Africa is building its own processing plants, its own battery factories, its own industries, and that terrifies the United States, that terrifies France, because they know what it means. They know that the electric car industry, the green energy revolution, the future of global power all depend on lithium. And if Africa controls its lithium, Africa controls the future. Look at what happened the moment Africa said no. Stock markets in the West shuddered. Corporations called emergency meetings. Analysts warned of supply shocks. Politicians raged behind closed doors. They know they cannot build their future without us. They know the empire's grip is slipping. They know the days of stealing Africa's wealth are numbered. And brothers and sisters, this is just the beginning. Today it is lithium. Tomorrow it will be cobalt. Then it will be gold, oil, gas, cocoa, cotton, rare earths. One by one, Africa is reclaiming them all. One by one, Africa is saying no to exploitation and yes to sovereignty. One by one, Africa is declaring to the world, we will not trade freedom for dollars. We will not exchange dignity for promises. We will not sacrifice tomorrow for crumbs today. But understand this, the empire will not go quietly. The United States will threaten. France will scheme. They will use their media to spread lies, painting Africa as unstable, as corrupt, as unprepared. They will send their diplomats with new deals, new promises, new tricks. They will even unleash sanctions and pressure, but it will not work. Because Africa has tasted freedom, and once you taste freedom, you cannot go back to chains. And to the people of Africa, I say, this victory is yours. It is your courage, your persistence, your demand for change that has forced our leaders to rise. It is your voice that has shaken the walls of empire. It is your belief that Africa deserves better that has turned rejection into revolution. We are not just rejecting a deal. We are rejecting a history of exploitation. We are rejecting a system built on theft. We are rejecting the lie that Africa is poor. We are rejecting the arrogance that Africa exists only to serve others. Tonight, the world knows the truth. Africa is awake. Africa is rising. Africa is unshakable. And if the United States and France want our lithium, they must come as equals, not as masters. They must come with respect, not with contracts of deception. They must come ready to build Africa, not just drain it. Brothers and sisters, this is only the beginning of a new If part 1 was the announcement of defiance, then let part 2 be the manifesto of liberation. Because rejecting a billion-dollar deal is not just about economics, it is about rewriting destiny. It is about saying, never again shall Africa be fooled into signing away its treasures for pennies. The United States and France believed Africa would bend because of desperation. They thought we would kneel because of poverty. They thought we would sell our lithium cheaply because of debt. They underestimated us. They underestimated the fire in the hearts of a new generation of Africans who have watched history and sworn, never again. Let us speak plainly. This rejection is not about arrogance. It is about intelligence. It is about learning from history. For when we look at the story of Africa, what do we see? We see oil flowing from Nigeria, enriching foreign banks while Nigerians line up for fuel. We see uranium taken from Niger, powering French cities while Niger's villages live in darkness. We see cocoa from Ghana and Ivory Coast filling European supermarkets while the farmers barely eat. We see gold, bauxite, diamonds, cobalt all ripped from the earth and flown abroad, leaving Africa with holes in the ground and empty hands. This time, with lithium, Africa said no, and by saying no, Africa has redefined power. Think of the significance. Lithium is the heartbeat of the green revolution. It is in the batteries that power Teslas in California, the smartphones in Paris, the laptops in London. Without lithium, the West cannot claim progress. Without lithium, their talk of green energy leadership is empty. And where is the lithium? Africa holds it. From the plains of Mali to the valleys of Zimbabwe, from the deposits of DRC to the reserves of Namibia, Africa is sitting on the treasure chest of tomorrow. The US and France came with contracts. They came with flashy numbers. $1 billion. They said, thinking Africa would dance. But what is a billion when the real value of Africa's lithium is in the trillions? What is a billion when the industries built on lithium will shape the future of the entire planet? What is a billion when generations of Africans have already been cheated of far more? This rejection was not about numbers. It was about vision. It was about demanding that if lithium leaves African soil, it must leave in batteries stamped made in Africa. If lithium is sold, it must be sold on Africa's terms, at Africa's price, not dictated from Washington or Paris. It was about demanding that processing plants rise on African soil, that jobs be created for African youth, that factories hum in African cities, that technology transfer flow not one way but both ways. And so Africa has spoken, and the world trembles. Do you know what frightens the United States most? Not just that Africa said no, but that Africa said no together. Burkina Faso stood beside Mali. Ghana stood beside Zimbabwe. Tanzania stood beside DRC. Suddenly, the old trick of divide and rule has failed. For the first time, nations across the continent are aligning their interests, uniting their voices, and standing shoulder to shoulder. That unity is what terrifies them most, because unity means bargaining power. Unity means no single nation can be bullied with sanctions, isolated with threats, or bought with loans. Unity means Africa sets the price of its resources, not foreign capitals. Unity means Africa is not a playground, it is a powerhouse. Let us go deeper. When Africa said no to the lithium deal, the US media tried to spin it. They called it reckless. They called it short-sighted. They claimed Africa was pushing away investment. But we know the truth. What they call investment is exploitation. What they call partnership is plunder. What they call aid is a chain. France raged behind closed doors. For decades, France has survived by feeding off Africa's minerals. Uranium from Niger lights Paris while Niger itself stays in darkness. Gold from Mali fills French reserves while Mali remains poor. And now, with lithium, they thought they would repeat the same story. But Mali said no, Burkina Faso said no, Niger said no, and France was humiliated. Do you see the shift? For centuries, Africa was told to be grateful for whatever crumbs were thrown its way. Today, Africa is the one setting the terms. Today, Africa is the one saying take it or leave it. Today, Africa is the one turning away deals that do not respect its dignity. And what of the United States? Washington is panicking. Senators call emergency hearings. CEOs of corporations demand answers. Analysts on Wall Street predict instability in global markets. But the truth is not instability, the truth is equality. They are not panicking because Africa is unstable. They are panicking because Africa is stable, because Africa is asserting itself, because Africa is no longer playing the role of a colony. Imagine the future unfolding before us. Africa processes its lithium, builds its own batteries, powers its own cars, and sells to the world on its own terms. Imagine African youth employed not in mines with broken tools but in factories with advanced technology. Imagine cities where battery plants rise like monuments to sovereignty. Imagine a world where the phrase made in Africa means innovation, not just raw material. That is what the US and France fear, not just the rejection of a deal, but the rise of a competitor. They fear an Africa that does not just supply but creates, an Africa that does not just export but transforms, an Africa that does not just survive but leads. Brothers and sisters, this rejection has global implications. When Africa said no, it sent a signal to Asia, to Latin America, to the entire global South. We too can say no. We too can reclaim our resources. We too can dictate terms. Africa has opened a door that others will follow. And when others follow, the global order will change forever. Do not underestimate the courage this required. To say no to $1 billion deal from the United States and France is to risk backlash, to risk pressure, to risk sabotage. But Africa took the risk because Africa knows that the greater risk is to remain a slave. And now, let us look at what comes next. The rejection of this deal is not the end, it is the beginning. It is the beginning of building Africa's own lithium industry. It is the beginning of alliances with partners who come with respect, not exploitation. It is the beginning of an Africa that refuses to be the warehouse of the world and instead becomes the workshop of the world. The US will try to fight back. France will try to destabilize. But their era is ending. Africa's time is now. And nothing, not sanctions, not threats, not lies can stop the tide of history. So I say to every African youth, look at what your continent has done. It has said no where for centuries it was forced to say yes. It has risen where for centuries it was forced to kneel. It has chosen dignity where for centuries it was stripped of pride. This is your inheritance. This is your revolution. This is your future. And to the West I say, respect Africa or lose Africa. Come as equals or be left behind. The days of exploitation are over. The age of sovereignty has begun. Because when Africa rejected that billion-dollar deal, it was not just rejecting a contract, it was rejecting an entire system. It was rejecting centuries of colonialism. It was rejecting the arrogance of empire. It was rejecting the lie that Africa's wealth is not its own. And so, tonight, let the message ring from the deserts of Mali to the forests of Congo, from the coasts of Ghana to the savannas of Kenya. Africa is free. Africa is sovereign. Africa is unshakable. The lithium belongs to Africa. The future belongs to Africa, and the world must now reckon with that truth. This is not the end. This is the dawn, and the dawn belongs to us. The world has just witnessed a moment that history will never erase. Africa stood face to face with the United States and France, nations that for centuries have fed on our resources, dictated our politics, and shaped our destiny for their own profit. They came with $1 billion contract, expecting our leaders to sign without hesitation. They came thinking we would bow, thinking desperation would force us to kneel. But Africa said no. That word, two simple letters, echoed across the globe like a storm. It was not just a refusal of money. It was a refusal of chains. It was not just a rejection of exploitation. It was a declaration of sovereignty. It was Africa shouting to the world, our wealth will no longer be stolen. Our future will no longer be sold. Our destiny will no longer be written in foreign capitals. Understand this. Lithium is not just a mineral. It is the bloodstream of the new century. It powers electric cars, smartphones, solar grids, and the engines of tomorrow. Whoever controls lithium controls the future. For decades, that control was assumed to belong to the West. But now the Earth itself has revealed the truth. Africa holds the keys. From Zimbabwe to Mali, from Congo to Namibia, the veins of our land are lined with lithium, the very fuel of modern civilization. And when America and France tried to grab it cheaply, Africa stood tall and said, the age of theft is over. This rejection is bigger than economics. It is psychological warfare turned on its head. For centuries, the colonizer told Africa, you are weak, you are poor, you are dependent on us. But with one unified voice, Africa answered, We are strong, we are rich, and you depend on us. That reversal is what terrifies Washington and Paris. They are not afraid of losing a deal, they are afraid of losing control. Let us be clear, the West is not angry because Africa is irrational. They are angry because Africa is rational at last. They are angry because the trap has been exposed, because the lies no longer work, because the contracts they once called partnerships are now unmasked as chains. They are angry because Africa is finally demanding factories instead of empty promises, demanding processing plants instead of raw deals, demanding jobs for its youth instead of jobs for theirs. Think about it. For the first time, the Global South has seen an African continent not begging for loans but dictating terms. For the first time, Africa is not selling raw or for pennies but demanding a seat at the table of industrial power. For the first time, Africa has the leverage to say, if you want our lithium, it will be processed here. If you want our minerals, they will build African industries. If you want our cooperation, it will be on equal terms. And so tonight, let it be known. Africa has not just rejected a deal, it has rejected an entire world order. That is why Wall Street trembles. That is why Paris fumes. That is why Washington panics. Because this single act of defiance is contagious. It spreads like fire. If Africa can reject America and France, then Latin America can reject them too. If Africa can demand fair trade, Asia can demand it too. If Africa can stand tall, the entire Global South can rise. And once that happens, the empire crumbles. So let the West be shocked. Let them rage in their chambers of power. Let them draft new strategies. New sanctions, new schemes. None of it will work, because the tide has turned and history is no longer on their side. The question is no longer whether Africa can survive without America. The question is whether America can survive without Africa. Without our cobalt, their batteries die. Without our uranium, their power plants dim. Without our gold, their currencies shake. Without our lithium, their green revolution collapses. The truth is undeniable. They need us more than we need them. And so, brothers and sisters, let this conclusion thunder in your hearts. The rejection of this billion-dollar lithium deal was not the end of a negotiation, it was the beginning of a revolution. It was the line in the sand, the turning of the page, the breaking of the chain. It was the sound of Africa waking, rising, roaring into the future. No longer the world's quarry, no longer the world's warehouse, no longer the world's victim. Africa is the future. Africa is the engine. Africa is the storm that cannot be stopped. And tonight, to the world, Africa says with one voice, respect us or be left behind.